welcome to Running with Rainbows. It's Maya Larson, and we are into part 2 for September, and we are covering cyanotype printing. Now, cyanotype printing is a wonderful creative outlet. It's not really complicated. You don't need to go out and buy a whole ton of stuff. You can use a lot of things you may already have on hand at home. And it really gives you that wow factor really quick, which I love, and it gets you outside. Although I did find out by accident that you can also process your cyanotype prints inside, which is great news for me in the winter. So as you see on the video here, I'm just giving you a quick rundown of the overall process. You throw down your stencils on a pre-treated sheet of paper or fabric, process it in the sun, and rinse in cold water, and ta-da! And there you have it. So if you're interested in doing something like the face, I recommend you look at stencils, because those are a quick and easy way to make a beautiful piece of art. If you're not quite confident with your composition design skills, just create a print. That was originally what cyanotypes were made for. They were a form of blueprinting, or actually they were the precursor to blueprinting. But a lovely lady first pioneered and created the first photo book, so by using the cyanotype recipe that was created. So here are some examples of how you can use fabric. I used cyanotype on photo paper that was blank, on watercolor paper, on canvas. I highly recommend, if you're going to try this process on fabric, that you use good quality fabric and thick fabric. I did try and do a pillowcase, but it was cheap, slippery fabric from the dollar store, and even though I thought it was kind of cottony, it didn't hang on to the dye solution at all. So don't recommend you use really fine fabric. I recommend you use something that's going to absorb the cyanotype solution. There's definitely going to be some rinsing. So in as far as preparation goes, you're going to need a dark towel to let your processed cyanotypes dry on. You're going to need a sink that can rinse in, that isn't going to maybe stain. So I have a stainless steel sink, so I recommend that, or using a bucket outside. The cyanotype solution, once it's mixed, also stains. So I did this in the garage, which I'll show you in this video. We go out into my garage to process. Here is the cyanotype solution. You're going to buy it in powder form in these plastic containers. You're going to add, I recommend using distilled water, but you can use tap water. You have to shake it and let it process overnight before you use it to dye. So here are some tank tops and shirts that I used the cyanotype solution on, that the fabric was a better quality and, as you can see, absorbed the dye well. I didn't uniformly apply my solution. In fact, in this case, I just sprayed it on with a spray bottle. I wanted it to look sort of undone and abstract. You can, of course, use your entire 2 bottles, create a tub of solution, and just dip garments in. But ultimately, I recommend you go at this slowly with small objects, working your way up to big, because there's a lot that you want to remember as you work through, and there's a lot of exploration and discovery and timing that you're going to need to work through as well. It can go out in the sun for as little as 11 minutes or 3 hours, and if you're using fabric, I recommend leaving it out longer. And if you have a lot of gap between the stuff you're using to print on, I actually recommend you don't leave it out as long, because then it gives the sun a chance to creep under that edge that isn't quite flat. In a lot of cyanotype process, you'll see that they use stencils or dried flowers that are pressed so that everything is very flat, and you get a very nice white on blue, which you can see here. But where you can see some of that fuzz, or there's a little less sharp defined line, this stencil that I made was a bit thicker, so it did leave a little bit of room for sun to creep in. But you know what? We're all about embracing our cringe, celebrating our mistakes, and just trying stuff out. If you head to the dollar store, grab these little wooden cutouts. These are perfect for this because they are flat enough. Or here's a stencil. You can cut them out and place them as you will. I created a butterfly art project, so I ended up having that stencil, which you saw previously. I have some lace pieces, fabric, even string is a wonderful tool for negative space when it comes to cyanotype. So here I am in my garage. It's low light, so I can mix the solution without worrying that I'm going to expose it immediately and it will become the color that I want the paper. I've created a bit of a lean-to with a piece of plywood against my recycling bin, and I have my 140-pound hot pressed watercolor paper. So what I've done here is spray I've mixed equal parts into my spray bottle with nothing else, and I'm spraying it directly onto the paper. Now, because I'm running out of it, I'm actually marrying my papers together as a way to spread the solution more evenly. Spraying is great, brushing is ultimately preferred, and you can see that puddling up there. You don't want that. So if you see that on your papers, you need to drip it off, or as I do here, I marry them a couple of times just so the watercolor paper will activate and start soaking up the solution. Now you need to dry them. So I put those papers inside these big boxes so there'll be a lot of air circulation and the paper would dry, because I've had stuff not dry overnight and then put it out in the sun and it hasn't been as pretty a blue as I would like. Again, it's all about experimentation and working with what works for you. What I'm going to show you how to do today as well is create your own beautiful botanical collections to use as your printing material. So here I've gone, and what I did is I put packing tape on one side of a frame with no canvas in it. So here's the packing tape I used, cheap stuff, and I coated one side of this frame with it and just cutting off at each edge and wrapping it around the wood a little bit. Now this is great because what I found was that as it dried, I can continuously use this as a tool for cyanotypes. I don't need to constantly go out and gather new greens or new flowers or new whatever, because as these live plants that I collected and harvested dry, they are still usable in the cyanotype. They can just sit directly on the paper, and in fact there's less of a gap between the paper and the tape than in some of the glass cases. So here again, the cyanotype solution, A and B. You mix it with clean water into each, you let it sit overnight before using, and then you always mix equal parts. So like I said, I've applied it with a brush and a bowl. I find the spray bottle much faster, and if you have a sponge brush, that's quite honestly the quickest way to get it out on a piece of paper, and you can go with a really big sponge brush if you want to go over a big surface. Now you do need bright sun. You don't want any shadows casting, and once you lay down your cyanotype against the paper, you don't want to move it or you will get multiple prints. So it'll look like a ghost image, and if that's what you're going for, then celebrate it because it's fun to do. Here is that live one. It's sitting against the plastic. You can also put a sheet of glass on it, and that'll help heat things up. I think part of the problem, if I were to do this in the winter, is that it's too cold to put it outside, even though the UV index is high. Now, as far as rinsing goes, I'm going to recommend you rinse in as cold as water as possible for at least 3 to 4 minutes. What you want to avoid leaving behind is a yellow-green residue. Now, if you have some pooling, which sometimes just happens, and even though I tried to avoid it with a few of mine this time, it still ended up there, you may have areas in your cyanotype that do have a hue of a yellow-green cast. If you plan on matting them, you may not even see that, but just be prepared to explore and practice, because getting it on the first try can be very difficult. Now these are dried hydrangeas that I collected on a walk outside and pressed in a book, and I put them underneath a cutout of sort of a potion bottle that I had made. Now I didn't really anticipating all that acrylic paint, because I had used it as a stencil for another piece, having the impact it did, and I love that kind of aura it cast around the bottle. Now here's my butterfly cutout full of the hydrangeas on the inside as well, and it went and sat out in the sun. So here I am back in my garage with the paper. It's the next day. These are dry, but as you can see along the edges, they are not even. I can see there's light and dark, and there's a pooling area. They may end up that yellow-green at the end, and I'm fine with that. I'm learning, I'm exploring, I'm sort of now able to pinpoint where my mistakes might lead me, and that's kind of the whole reason we are doing this kind of exploratory art, this satisfying the curiosity and trying things, because the more you try, the more you add to that inner library of creative ideas. So here I've got a dried snapdragon in with my dried hydrangeas, and I'm just sort of placing it. We're in dim light, so I've got a bit of time to play before these things start to become part of the print underneath. And I've got a piece of glass. Now as far as glass goes, take an old frame, picture frame, use a glass from that. That is entirely fine. I filled up that beautiful big taped canvas with weeds and a lily that was the one that grew in my yard this year. Went out with my pruning shears and just collected a bunch of local grasses. Unfortunately for me, I chose a pillowcase that was inferior quality material, and while the print did transfer, the fabric was incapable of holding on to it, so it was a bit of an epic fail. However, the process was worth it. Now I'll go and scope out some good quality pillowcases. These were journal covers that I had put cyanotype solution on, but you try rinsing that kind of paper in a sink, so I wouldn't recommend it. And yeah, just different processing. The journals are processing. Here I had canvas with cyanotype solution on it, another experiment. Again, trying to rinse canvas is a challenging process. So ultimately for me, cyanotypes are the best on watercolor paper or fabric, something that can tolerate the rinsing process. So here with this one, I had actually done this in my living room just on the floor in the sun, and it processed like lickety-split. So surprise on me. You can do it in the house. You just have to have a good warm sunny spot. Here is the pillowcase, and as you can see, as soon as that water hits it, basically most of the cyanotype solution is rinsed right out, and I'm left with a beautiful light, very sky blue pillowcase color, but it doesn't have the blue and hard white that I was hoping to achieve. Here is a print on a photographic paper. I did some on needlepoint fabric as well. That was a gem that turned out nice. You just iron it and then sew back on. This is watercolor paper as well. So I hope you guys have fun trying out the cyanotype. Share it if you make it.